and we'll make a start. Welcome to the fourth episode of Hope in a Time of Apocalypse. We started in January, had a little break, and have now been doing our Zoom version, and this is our fourth. Last week we had Brad Pettit and Josh Wilson. That's now on the St. Paul's website, and you can follow that. A really good little discussion. Before that, we had Peter Dowding and Christabel Charmaret, and before that, Fiona Stanley. All of them are on the website, and you can catch up with them at any point. Very good feedback from Chris Wortham the other day, saying how much he enjoyed going back. He had to watch it twice. It was so interesting. So let's hope we have such a fabulous discussion today. I'm sure we will. 2 stars today, Josh and Jemma, both a privilege for me to supervise in their PhDs, both with quite journeys to get there, a lot of preparation, if you like. Josh through journeying into landscape and environmental work in ways that opened up new areas that he knew were ripe for research, but nobody else could quite see for a while. And Jemma going off to work in London as an investment banker, and then coming back with ideas that have finally firmed up into a PhD. So they're much more than researchers, though. Both have got a career as a researcher, full-time, but there are 3 Josh Byrnes and 5 Jemmas, as far as I can see. Josh has got 3 full-time careers. One is in the media, in Gardening Australia, and you'll see him tomorrow night on Gardening Australia at 7:30 on the ABC. He's also the CEO of a landscape consulting firm that does amazing work and has fitted into a lot of the research we've been doing. And Jemma's got 5 careers. One is the researcher, one is the CEO of Powerledger, not the CEO, the chair of the company. One is a politician. That Jemma seems to have disappeared a bit. She was the deputy mayor of the city of Perth for a short period. But the one that hasn't disappeared is as a mother. I should say Josh is also a father, and his 2 kids are doing amazingly. But Jemma's just had her 3rd child 12 days ago. So keep that in mind if you're thinking of that she doesn't do much. The 5th career is in the media, where she has been a constant performer, and mostly on Channel 2 type ABC shows, but gets quite a bit of coverage. And today there was a press release which got a big coverage in the Australian Financial Review. And
actually, it was in WA Business News, but we'll see the national news on it tomorrow.
Oh, okay. National news tomorrow. Very good. So that's the kind of people we've got on today. But we want to see how we make change happen. That's really what hope is about. How do we make change when we're confronted by issues and problems that seem overwhelming? And there's plenty of them around at the moment. And in particular, how can we live without fossil fuels? And both Josh and Jemma have made a career so far in the research world and in the papers. Josh has just told me he's written 36 academic papers in the last 3 years.
6 years.
6 years. Oh, that sounds slightly more possible. So what I want to see you both help me with, how do we live without fossil fuels? How do you do it? And Josh, if you could start and just tell us about your house, the famous house, which is, and how that has become famous around the world, and the other work that's proceeded from that. So how did that all get started, your house?
Well, my wife and I have been renting homes for years, and I would fix the garden up and often film that on Gardening Australia. And of course, as you would know, a number of those homes and gardens became case studies in my PhD, but we really wanted to have our own home, and we got to a point with young kids and settling down as a family that we thought it was time to get a home. And we thought, well, let's actually build one. Having rented so many places and fixed them up, we thought it'd be lovely to do it right from the start. So we bought a block in Hilton, we bought a large block, and we partnered with my wife's sister and decided to build 2 homes on the one block. It was a very sensible thing to do, both financially and just in terms of family support, both with young families. So it was always going to be a project where the homes would be high performance homes with good environmental credentials, obviously with my interest and my wife's background also as an environmental scientist. And it was actually, I guess, a bit of a challenge that I set myself. In addition to wanting to build a home with good environmental credentials, I wanted to challenge this perception that's out there that high performance homes that are comfortable to live in with little to no air conditioning requirements, that are running mainly on renewable energy and that are very water efficient, that these can actually be done cost effectively and using mainstream skills and trades now. They don't have to be complicated. They don't have to be boutique, and they can look like regular homes up and down the street. So that's what we set out to do, and we did it. And we built 2 10-star NatHES rated homes that generated more power than they used and collected and recycled most of their own water, and importantly had gardens around them that produce food and provide shade and provide biodiversity benefits. But of course, there was an opportunity to make that quite a public process, and using my role in the media and having a bit of a public profile. So here's a chance to raise awareness of the fact that this is very achievable. So we set out to document the whole process with a video series, and we produced that like we would do a television program. So very high quality, but we made the whole thing open source and publicly accessible. We also made a commitment to document the whole project in a very detailed way with design documentation and make that available also, open source. And then also I wanted to make sure that we monitored the performance of the home once built, so we could verify our initial design objectives. And of course, it was a very well-timed conversation over breakfast with you, Peter, when I told you about the project when we were still in planning phase, that I wanted to make sure there was a research chapter to it. And when you kindly opened the door to me at Cusp, which turned into a very fertile research career. But what that meant was that we could actually put in place a program of research to capture how the house performed. And the timing was right. I think it hit a real chord. There was a lot of interest in it. We were very mindful of how we positioned the project with industry, that we weren't trying to do anything outrageous. We were, again, just trying to do things that were well understood and were very achievable, but the benefits were very clear around comfort, health and well-being, and affordability to run the home. And that was really what we set out to do, and what I'm very pleased to say that we've achieved.
So what about the website? That's had huge numbers of hits, hasn't it, from all around the world? Yeah. So we also put together, I guess, a communications campaign that, in addition to the videos and the documentation, we also had a website, we had fact sheets, a social media campaign that went with it. And we also worked very closely with industry, and this was part of our strategy. We wanted to really make sure that this was something that current building industry felt comfortable with. So that went for our own builder, who I should say was a non-specialist volume builder who hadn't done this type of thing before. And we set a very clear challenge that we wanted to deliver both these homes for a typical volume family home price and time frame. So
about 6 months construction for both homes. And we engaged with the various suppliers and trades to really make it an opportunity not only to upskill industry, but for them to hopefully get excited by it and to share the journey through their networks as well. And that was very, very successful. And of course, the numbers in terms of views and plan downloads and website hits were all very impressive. But
tell us how impressive. You're in the millions, aren't you?
I think the website's up around the million hits. We've had probably 100,000 downloads of our plans and supporting fact sheets. And what's great though is that there's actually 3 other homes designed just like mine and designed by our design partner that follow the same sort of floor plan layout and incorporate the same technologies just in our street.
All right.
So that's very real evidence, I guess, on a local scale that people are watching. And what was wonderful, one of the things that really meant a lot to me is we had an open day. So not long after we completed the homes, we opened the house for a Sustainable House Day. And this was back in 2013. And we arranged with the City of Fremantle, who were very supportive of what we're trying to demonstrate, we arranged road closure for our street. And we invited all the project partners, so all the people that have been involved in one way or another, to come and attend and set up a stall and showcase what they were doing and what they could offer other people. And we had 4,000 people roll up on that day. It was quite remarkable. We managed to get 3,000 people physically through the house over that sort of 6 or 7 hour period when it was open. And the rest just milled around and enjoyed the atmosphere. We had buskers and we had pop-up food stalls, and it was a wonderful atmosphere of people coming to find out what's available and what does this thing look like. But really also, I think it's an indication of the amount of interest in this approach to housing.
Yeah, well, I don't know anyone else who's given away their plans and had thousands of people download them to use, but that's pretty impressive. But then you've taken it further and worked with developers across the country, across Australia, to try and show how project homes can be built like this. Can you tell us quickly about how that's worked and how successful that's been?
Sure. So one of the things that we're able to demonstrate with our build, again, using non-specialist builder, regular trades, regular building supply chain materials, was that we could get really good thermal performance. So making your home thermally comfortable, which means reduced, or in our case with a 10-star home, no additional heating and cooling requirements, which is normally the major energy use in a modern family home. And then also through the incorporation of very sensible and now quite mainstream technologies like energy efficient appliances and lighting and hot water heating, and of course rooftop solar, that you can make those homes operate at net zero energy. We're able to go one step further with a great research collaboration with Jemma, which I'm sure she'll talk to about, then incorporating a battery to make sure that we're actually fully self-reliant on our own renewable energy, and in fact being a net exporter on top of meeting the household's needs. But what we were able to be quite comfortable with at that point was that these approaches, both from a design and a technology perspective, are very accessible and aren't outside the realm of mainstream industry. But there was still this perception out there that either the stuff is difficult and expensive or people don't want it. So through our research work with the CRC for Low Carbon Living, we designed a research project that engaged with major developers and builders in other cities around Australia to work with volume builders from the very early stages of them developing their display homes for new housing developments. And we set up a particular methodology of refining the designs that they'd already put forward. We sort of accepted the fact that builders who are in that business have spent a lot of time developing particular housing products that they feel are popular in the market. So we weren't going in to try and tell them how to totally change that, because I think that would have been too confrontational. But rather it was about, okay, how about we work together, and by using this particular design review methodology that we established, supported by real-time modelling as we went through and looked at different minor design tweaks, so looking at adjusting orientation as was possible on the particular lot that was selected, really interrogating the building fabric to make sure it was thermally well sealed, and then also what's possible as far as efficient heating and cooling, efficient hot water heating, and importantly, going all electric, and therefore really being able to look at optimising the availability of renewable energy, whether it be from on-site generation or from elsewhere in the grid, but doing away with gas.
Yeah, and you got
and that was very,
well.
very successful. We had fantastic feedback and take up, and we've seen these display homes that we've worked on, and the builders that were involved really take those concepts into their greater work too, and in fact also contributing to policy change, certainly in Victoria, where that particular project informed a larger sort of statewide trial, which is exciting, and also helped inform some work that's happening up in New South Wales and ACT also. So it's amazing, even small but strategic projects can have an important impact. We still have a long way to go. There's no doubt about that. Perhaps we can talk about that a bit later in the conversation. But we have the knowledge as a community of practice and industry, and with the right policy levers, we can move towards net zero energy housing very, very quickly in this country.
What about the electric vehicle side of things? You can tap that into your renewable energy as well. Has that worked?
Yeah, it has. Well, we had quite an interesting little journey with the house. So keeping in mind that we designed and specified the home and fit out in 2012 for the 2013 build. And at that time, certainly the core principles of climate responsive housing haven't changed for a very, very long time. Good orientation, good materials, good insulation, and then of course using efficient appliances. The big thing that's really moved along is obviously how cheap solar is, but also the onset of batteries as an accessible item, and also just how cost effective things like air source heat pumps are for heating hot water. So when we first designed the home, we're always very, very comfortable with that. But some of the tech that we chose, we went for a gas boosted solar hot water system, for example, and a gas cooktop. So we had reticulated gas to the property, and that was because at that point in time, we were looking at the cost effectiveness and payback of some of this tech. The thinking of the day for a low carbon home was, in addition to that climate responsive design, it's very efficient. As far as the energy inputs, a solar system, we had a 3 kilowatt PV with a 2.5 kilowatt inverter, was more than enough to cover our energy needs from a net perspective over the course of the year. Rooftop solar thermal for hot water, but then to boost that during the cooler months and to cook, gas was kind of considered the transition option there. And then we sized up the PV system just big enough to offset the carbon emissions from that. And that was kind of the thinking of the day. What was really interesting was within, and I should say batteries at that point were just not on the horizon. We did a bit of desktop research and getting one for a start, let alone the cost was not there. And it was Jemma's work only 18 months later that all of a sudden made us realise that this was more accessible than perhaps we thought. That said, it still took Jemma and I nearly 12 months to finally get one simple battery approved through the system and connected to our house as the first one on the southwest.
That was the first one.
System, just one, the first one. But interestingly, things moved very quickly from there. Within another, and I'll let maybe Jemma talk about some of the results of that and where that took her work. But interestingly, within 12 or even 18 months, and I dare say Jemma had a lot to do with this, there's a lot of talk out there in industry about opportunities for battery storage, about rethinking the grid, about energy sharing, and we'll get to WGV in due course in the conversation, no doubt. But what we also found is that a lot of the technologies around to be able to completely electrify a home, so induction cooking and air source heat pump for hot water heating, that were boutique products when we built our home. Within 2 years, they're now volume products. and very cost effective. And so in some of the other research work that I was doing, looking at homes both at WGV and as part of this national zero energy housing research project, and in the consultancy work we were doing, we were seeing that the reality of an all-electric home and even all-electric housing developments were within reach. And so, as I always like to do, I wanted to test this stuff myself. So we bit the bullet, and we actually swapped out the gas-boosted solar hot water system for an air source electric heat pump for hot water. We got rid of the gas cooktop and put in an induction, and it was very satisfying to actually disconnect from gas. We also upsized the PV system. We had to put a new battery in, and of course the battery technology moved along very quickly, even in 2 years, to a much more efficient model. And then to get to your original question, we also got an electric vehicle for a trial for 12 months to understand the impact of charging an EV on a home system with solar and a battery. And we collected that data over 12 months and got a very detailed understanding about what's possible in terms of running an all-electric home, not just for the operational nature of the house, but also to include transport. And it was a wonderful, practical first-hand experience with all sorts of learnings about system sizing and what trips out and what doesn't. And working with the industry partners that we engaged through that project, that information has now fed out into their workplace practices. And it really is a great example of a living lab. And of course, we now take those learnings and those approaches into our commercial projects. So the work we're now doing with Development WA and others are all fully electric homes in fully electric developments. We've moved away from having to connect gas to these things. And we're seeing that trend on a big scale with major developers on the horizon right around the country.
Well, there's no doubt that you're a genuine leader and that process is now well underway. A lot of people following in this and showing that it can be done. And you've asked Jemma to comment on that. So let's switch to Jemma, and I'll come back to you both to talk about what drives you to keep this amazing intensity of enthusiasm and hope, because it is quite infectious and it's showing a lot of fruit now. So Jemma, you need to just quickly chime in and say, how did you help on that process, and how did it go from there to being, well, let me just say, Richard Branson says that Jemma is now running a company that is likely to be the next big multinational corporation with all its international work. So that's quite a jump, but let me just give you the floor.
Thank you, Peter. So yeah, I mean, the opportunity to put a battery, the first battery in a home in the West Australian or Southwest grid was, hugely exciting for me. And to do applied research in my PhD meant that, it wasn't just a kind of theoretical piece of analysis. It was something that, there was a project. So I was working on a real life project with Josh, and we were trying, I liked it because you couldn't find the answers in Google, and, you had to, there wasn't somebody that you could call up and get advice on. So we figured it out, and we figured it out by making mistakes as well. So, we had to, we didn't realize, for example, that there was actually a lot of parasitic load in the original battery system that we put in Josh's house, and it was consuming quite a lot of power. And the system that we had contemplated before that, it was taking a very long time to get approvals to be able to install in Australia. And so we ended up switching systems. And, Josh talked about the kind of technology shift that happened, just in this intervening period. And it really has been quite amazing. Like, even in my house, we've put in one of these now mainstream hot water systems, which has got an air source heat pump attached to it. And we just put it in about 6 weeks ago, and I couldn't believe the price is less than half of what it was 4 years ago when we last looked at it. And it's, it's absolutely competitive with like a gas hot water system. But at the time, we didn't know that. We were forecasting the price of these things were coming down. We were making graphs that showed, oh, it's going to compete with, grid sourced electricity pricing, but that it actually happened faster than what we anticipated, I think was a real surprise for me, at least, and is a source of huge excitement. To answer your question, Peter, where do we get our energy from, is that I can see the change unfolding, and that I just like the idea of being able to catalyze these things and make them manifest here. Like I feel that they should be happening in Perth as fast as anywhere else, or faster. So I think that it's great we've got these demonstration projects. And I was going to ask you, Josh, of all the downloads and people accessing your website, how many people from outside of Western Australia, or indeed internationally, do you track that kind of, like, how much interest has your project got from overseas?
It's been a lot. Yes, we do track that. And it's come from the most unusual places. A lot from Asia, from India, and also South Africa, Europe. It's quite interesting. And even though the housing typology and even the design from a climate zone perspective may not be suitable, I think there's just interest in the concept of looking at building a home that is much more comfortable and much more efficient to run. So it's been quite intriguing to see where the interest has come from.
Not in the US. No US?
Not much from the US, interestingly.
Yeah.
No, I don't know why that is.
I think they're a little distracted. Jemma, you better tell us about WGV. How did it then go from the house to a development with 100 houses on it, and how they shared solar? That was the big story that was part of your contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Peter and I saw through my doctoral research that, there was a shift happening in terms of the type of houses we were building. It used to be freehold houses, and then there were a lot of apartments or dwellings inside of strata, so townhouses and different typologies. And that meant that you could have a shared solar and battery system, but that actually hadn't been done either. And the laws that govern these kinds of developments, strata law in Australia, provision for shared ownership of these kinds of infrastructure, like a shared solar system and a shared battery system, but it hadn't been implemented or utilised. And so we applied to ARENA to fund putting batteries into 3 apartment buildings at WGV to demonstrate how that could work, so that people that were living in these kinds of dwellings were not locked out of being able to access renewable energy, which they pretty much were at this point. There wasn't really very much rooftop solar, and definitely not battery storage. And so there's 3 developments there at WGV. There's the Gen Y housing development, Shack and Evermore, and they all have a slightly different setup, but essentially at Evermore and Gen Y, each apartment is given an allocation of access to the solar and battery system, and if they don't use that, they can trade that with their neighbours. And so we conceived this idea on paper, but we hadn't found software that could actually make it function how we had hoped. And then by chance, a former banking colleague of mine introduced me to 2 technologists that worked in the blockchain, and I met them when I just had my first child, Amelie. She was about 7 weeks old, and they were telling me about this blockchain and how it could actually democratize so many things. And I said, well, could it do something with electricity? And we subsequently looked into it and saw that it could. And so it sort of morphed from my PhD research project to setting up a business called Powerledger, which was formed 4 years ago in May 2016. And the WGB projects were the first instances of the technology being used, like creating a trading marketplace inside a microgrid and also across grids as well.
So you've won various awards for this work now. Just tell us quickly about that. You had to go to Las Vegas or something, didn't you, at one time, and
Yeah.
the Virgin Islands to receive an award? It's hard to
Yeah,
keep.
I was very fortunate to be invited to Sir Richard Branson's island in 2017 to attend a blockchain summit which he was hosting on his island in the British Virgin Islands. And so I travelled, I think it was 40 hours with my daughter Emily, who was just over 1 at the time, and I was still breastfeeding her, so I dragged her everywhere with me. And then Sir Richard Branson is the sponsor of a global tech competition called the Extreme Tech Challenge, and Powerledger entered that, and we got shortlisted for the semi-finals in Las Vegas. So I went out there and pitched to at the Consumer and Electronics Conference, which is a massive conference attended by about 200,000 people, and we were shortlisted from the semi-finals to the finals. And the finals were actually on Sir Richard Branson's island. So I got to go back there a second time and pitch to him in a 7-minute pitch, and we won the competition. It was hugely exciting and also nerve-wracking. But the other competition that I was fortunate enough to win was in 2018. I was awarded the EY FinTech Entrepreneur of the Year for Australia. And then I just thought, this is, obviously, my mum's very proud, but I went, that's enough competitions and awards. I just want to focus on projects and the business. But It was such an amazing experience for the business, for a startup to be recognised and also to get legitimacy. And it really opened up a lot of doors for new projects. So we've now partnered with a utility in France, which is allowing customers to choose their own energy mix. So customers can specify, I want solar from this solar farm or wind from that farm. We've also partnered with a NASDAQ listed company in the US called Clearway, who have 6 gigawatts of renewables in their portfolio, and we're launching a renewable energy certificate trading platform with them this year. And in Asia, that's actually in a place similar to you, Josh, where there's been a lot of interest from our projects, including WGV. We had delegations from Thailand and Malaysia, 40 delegates from Malaysia and 25 from Thailand come to visit the WGV projects, and so many international visitors come to see that. And they're all asking, how to replicate these kinds of projects in their countries, but also how to reform their regulations to enable digital electricity markets and also distributed electricity markets. And I think that these projects stimulate a conversation that really wouldn't exist without them. That they can send that many people out, and they're actually going, oh, we want a version of this for our country, and that it's now changing the way laws are being written. In Thailand, we've licensed our software to the country of Thailand, to the government, in a deal we just announced about a month ago, because they want to use our technology to facilitate the transition. And they're asking, how do we change our tariffs as well? Like, what's the tariff for a distributed electricity market? So I think that these projects and obviously competitions help in raising the profile and enabling more of these kinds of things to happen. But ultimately for us, our vision is around delivering clean, low cost and resilient electricity markets and impacting the lives of 1 billion people. That's really the big driver for me, getting out of bed every morning, even with a newborn baby keeping me up at night.
Just the billion, I see. Yeah, well, look, it's all pretty amazing stuff, and a lot of people won't fully grasp what it is you've done, both of you. But the sense that we can do something in Perth that can help the world get off fossil fuels. That's the main message I just hoped would come through, and it's been a constant sense of amazement to me that we still in Perth think that we're sort of a backwoods, the Wild West that doesn't do anything other than mining. But we in fact have got some very clever things that have happened, and they haven't actually happened not driven by governments. They have been driven by researchers working and creating new markets, new opportunities. But certainly government has helped with the WGV project for a start. A lot of interest from them. But then again, there was really only one person that got that over the line and got it out there. So there was a lot of bravery in those days to get those projects up and running. All Fremantle stuff, by the way. It's something to be proud of, being part of Fremantle and seeing this. Just tell us briefly how you work with government to convince them to move in this direction so that you can actually lead and not wait.
Well, I think it's similar to what Josh said earlier about working with the property development industry. You know, you've got to get alongside them and bring them on the journey. You know, you can't just, you know, and nor would we want to say, oh, these are all the areas where, you know, you're not doing it correctly. It's really about people experiencing the excitement and the opportunities that come from this, like with what is now called double. Oh, sorry, I have, this is my son Castiel.
Hey. Very good.
What is now development.
That's what you're working for.
It was previously Land Corp, and I mean, Josh introduced me to them, and we pitched this idea for the Gen Y project. Just 2 seconds. I've just got to give my 2-year-old to somebody else. 2 seconds.
Okay, Josh, take over, mate.
That's great. I love the real life nature of it.
Yeah, living the dream.
Yeah, you're back, Jemma.
Yeah, I am. So, Josh, actually, you know, I'm hugely grateful because there were so many things that I did, but they were supported by people like Peter and Josh. And, you know, I think that the opportunities were, really a coalescing of factors, but I wouldn't have been given the platform that I was without you guys trying to help me. And we pitched this idea to Land Corp, and, you know, it could have been totally received as you know, ridiculous, harebrained idea, but they decided, yeah, we're going to get back this, we're going to get behind it. And I think as a result of the interest that it attracted, the CEO, or the then and now CEO of Development WA and Land Corp, realised, oh, this is actually hugely important from a strategic perspective to sell property, and also in a soft market, and to demonstrate what's possible to the property market at large. And so they really embraced the idea of leadership in this area. And you could see that they were getting a lot of justified kudos from what they were doing. So for me, I could see this happening. And so I think that propelled me further to look at what other projects could we do that would raise the profile and awareness around this. And they've not always been easy conversations either. Like, there's lots of, you know, change. Everyone thinks that you get from, you know, current state to future state, and oh, that's a great place we want to get to. So the transition's really smooth, but it's not like that at all. You've got to deal with the transition, and that there's often winners and losers, and you've got to navigate each of those steps along the way, and deal with those circumstances responsibly, otherwise you won't keep people on side. And so I think that's been a big learning experience for me, understanding what's fundamentally important for all the existing stakeholders, and how do you address their concerns in such a way that you keep them on side. Because if you don't, then you haven't, you know, you're not going to get, the project won't realise its ambition, and you won't get the next and the bigger project. So, but I take a lot of, I get really interested in the dynamics of all of these things, like in markets, as Peter said, what has a new market emerge? And that is something that delivers value to enough people that it will it will cause a shift or a transition. So it's a demand-led shift. And I think with renewable energy, we're in a space right now where that is actually what's happening. There, instead of government subsidies, which are driving things, markets are, demand is, market mechanisms are, and there's a recognition that although renewables have been part of the problem in the grid and like causing huge instability in the grid, they can actually be part of the solution supported by a market mechanism. So I think that the Renew Nexus project, which was the sort of next iteration of this, I guess, from Josh's house, looking at a single house with batteries, to the WGV development, which was looking at apartments, then looking at cross-grid trading. Josh mentioned that his house is an energy exporter, and that is something that is happening quite a lot. Like people that have solar panels will typically be exporting half of their energy, and if they put a battery in, they could still be an exporter as well, both of the solar and the battery. Mommy, I'm just on. I've got another child here. Here's the other one. Emily, could you please shut the door?
Yeah, but these eggs pop up into a
Wonderful, wonderful.
Into a bunny.
Eggs pop up into a bunny. I just learned. So I think that the idea of what am I going to do with all that energy that I'm exporting? That has really like motivated me into looking at, well, the grid, we're either going to go into this off-grid world, or we're going to create a transactive grid, and who would be the players that need to come together to really look at that in earnest. And a lot of the projects that Powerledger is doing is around what's the market mechanism that's going to keep people engaged in the grid, but also solve the problems of the grid. So batteries sucking up surplus solar electricity during the day, and then also dispatching battery sourced electricity at night when the grid needs it the most. So turning renewables from the problem child to the solution. And again, there's no Google for this. It's not happened anywhere else. In fact, Australia is the ground zero where it's being looked at and solved, where there's been, very high penetration of renewables, and we're starting to see the dysfunction in the grid caused by that.
Yeah, well, it's very encouraging, and I'll get Josh in as well now, but I just, because we've got 13 minutes left, the idea that you've both brought into the system, that we can have solar and batteries and electric vehicles and get rid of coal, oil and gas, and that it's possible, and you've transitioned so far from house to wider development and now into the grid. And we're now in a COVID situation where people are looking to the future and trying to do things quicker. It seems to me there's a willingness to make a bigger change that's coming. And we have an opportunity, and it seems that we also have government reports and so on that are now saying we can do this in the next 5 years and be one of the first cities in the world to actually go through that entire transition and have a fossil fuel free city. Do you think this is possible? Josh first.
I think it's definitely possible if the political will is there, and if we can keep the vested interests that have a different reality in mind, linked to ongoing retention of profits, at bay. I don't think we should think it's going to be an easy transition, particularly in that time frame. But I think it's possible.
Okay, and
it
Jemma,
needs to happen. It needs to happen that quickly.
Sorry, and Jemma, you're the investment banker. Would you agree that you need to put the profits aside, or can it be done through market mechanisms that are helped?
If I can just clarify, Peter, when I talk about putting the profits aside, I'm talking about we have an incumbent ownership of certain assets and an investment structure in place at the moment where there are people who are making money off the status quo, and who are very, well linked to the existing power structures. And there is certainly a new economy and highly profitable alternative approach, but it's not just a technology change. It's actually it's a commercial change as well that has to happen. So probably a good time to hand it back to Jemma, but I'm not suggesting that a new clean economy is not profitable, but it's about change, and there will be some wealth change that has to happen.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I agree completely with what Josh said, and that was really what I was alluding to before in the transition, that incumbent stakeholders have their, existing portfolios that they want to maintain, and so you've got to address their concerns to bring them along for the ride. But I think that if governments around the world are really serious about incorporating renewable energy into their future energy planning, then it needs to be price competitive. And we are in a place now where that is actually happening. Like it's cheaper to put in renewable energy than it is traditional sources of energy. And it's unlikely that we'll see, coal-fired power stations built in this country again. But in terms of Western Australia, I've been really heartened by the DER, the Distributed Energy Resource Task Force that's set up by the government. And I understand that in the next week, they're going to be putting out a paper on virtual power plants. So how household batteries can collectively start to solve the problems of too much solar during the day, because the rules don't allow for it presently. But the task force is looking at how do we change the rules to enable the households, the citizens, to become greater utility to the grid and really, embody the idea of citizen utilities in the biggest sense of the word. So I'm really excited to see what they put out in that report. And I think it could, really be an idea that's time has come, and the only faster place that I could see it happening really is South Australia. They had so much renewables that their grid broke faster than ours, but they're part of the NEM and the National Electricity Market, and it's such a big behemoth, it's almost impossible to make things happen there fast. So I think that we've got the benefit of actually being a bit islanded. So to answer your question, Peter, I think that we could actually be, the leapfrog and also be the exemplar.
Very good. Now, I would like to see if there are any questions. If you want to just put your hand up or put it on the chat. But before doing that, we like to sort of see a little bit about the two of you, because you both have enormous energy and enthusiasm that is demonstrated now in this 6-8 year period that's been quite dramatic change, and you continue to drive forward to achieve these things, and all power to you. So where does it come from? Last week we asked that of Brad and Josh, and they were quite open to explaining some of their background. Josh, Jemma, do you want to go first and just say a little bit about what drives you?
Sure. I grew up on a farm in Warraloo, and I think that nature and sustainability was something that was always near and dear to my heart. I did an undergraduate degree in finance at Murdoch, and then worked as an investment banker in London, and moved back, as Peter mentioned, 7.5 years ago, and did a PhD with Peter, which was life-changing, and since then set up Powerledger. I should say I did go and do a master's in sustainability and a couple of postgraduate diplomas in sustainability when I was in the UK as well. But I think that studying is something that has been really just a feature of my life, my adult life. I don't plan on doing any formal study for the foreseeable future, but it certainly opened my eyes and also provided the bridge to go from one career in banking into the career that I have now as a tech entrepreneur. And I would also say that my faith has been a big part of it as well. I'm a Christian, and I think that like leaving our planet in a better way for our children, and also just doing the right thing, is something that has sort of been a moral compass in terms of how I like to operate. So yeah, I think that and having children, I think, has definitely sort of lasered my focus around just not wanting to spend time and waste time on things that are not meaningful or important, and also wanting to really be a great example for my children.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. And certainly there are three big reasons for driving you to a better future in the room there. Josh, what would you say?
I think firstly, I am very driven by seeing positive change. And when that's coupled with my interest in what I now sort of know and can define as systems thinking, how things work together, and it's something that I first really tapped into in my early gardening days, as strange as that may seem, when I often reflect back on how I first got interested in gardening, which then led into a broader interest in landscape design, and then urban design, urban infrastructure. And of course, whilst we've mainly spoken about my research work with you, Peter, here on housing and our personal journey with our family home, my working life is much broader than that. But the thing that connects all of them, and whether it's the work I do in landscape or energy or water or waste, is really how things work better when waste is eliminated and things work better as a working system. I've been very fortunate in my study and my working life. I'm quite an applied person. I worked part-time whilst I did both my undergrad and also my PhD, and I was always lucky to find work that was related to my study, and I always learnt a great deal from putting into practice what I was studying about. As I now look at the next sort of phase of my career, rather than formally studying per se, it's the research layer to my career that provides that opportunity for continued learning and critical thought, and providing an evidence base to what in many cases seems quite intuitive as a better way of doing things. But I think overall it's that drive to see positive change, and whether that be from a humanitarian perspective, or whether that be from an environmental perspective or an urban system perspective, and of course there's a great deal of interrelationship between all of those. It's that drive for positive change and seeing how things can be done better. I'm not a practicing Christian, but I was raised and schooled in a Catholic environment, and I am often asked to reflect back on that. And in fact, even just recently, when being asked to participate in an article for our school alumni, I went to John 23rd, I was asked to reflect back on, what it really was that I took from that school. I had a wonderful schooling period, great friendships that still last to this day, obviously a great education. But beyond all that, I think it's a sense of social justice, a sense of the importance of contribution that individuals can make, the importance of community and the richness that comes from that. And these, clearly are Christian values, and I think it's something that is not lost on me, even though I'm not a practicing Christian, as I say. Although I'm very much a spiritual person, it's about contribution, and I feel that we're all much better off if we all continue to contribute, and that's how we'll see good outcomes.
Well, I think it's been incredibly inspiring to see the contributions, and the word transition comes out very strongly, that you have both been able to see how by getting in at on a grassroots level and show something, and then it leads to the next stage and the next stage, and before long it's taking over the whole city and can bring in cities from around the world, can bring in change at various other levels. So that's been the inspiration, and it's a continual inspiration to me from you two, and I hope that you're able to keep doing this in amazing ways. There are a few questions that are being sent to me privately, but they're quite technical, and I'd rather leave them for the moment. And just to say that next Thursday we have two more people from the your generation, essentially, who've started to do quite incredible things. They're both from Fremantle, and one is Vanessa Rowland, who now runs Climate Clever, which works in schools, and she's created an app that is very useful for helping you in your home or at school, and she's joining them together and creating one now that's going to be for businesses that helps you to work out how much carbon you are using, how much water and energy and waste, and what you can do about it. It's all on this app. So it's a very clever thing, and it's one that I think is going to be very helpful to a lot of people. And the other person is Julian Illich, who I think is on the call. Julian is the managing director of Tiller Cycles. It's an electric bike. It's a really cool bike, and it's been manufactured in Fremantle, and he's going to tell us about that and how it's going, and it's part of his contribution into the transition that we're moving to in electromobility based on solar. And it's the kind of future that's unfolding where we need hopeful people who are creating these options for us. So I'm going to leave it at that, and just please, in whatever way you can, say thank you to these amazing people for what they've done. And if you need further information, joshshouse.com.au is the website, and Powerledger have their own website, but you can also, if you want to email them via me, I can pass it on, and there's plenty of information that they could help provide. But thank you very much. There is great hope in the apocalypse.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Really